Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherry Davidoff,
I'm Matt Duran.
and today we're going to talk about the Nancy Guthrie case. This is gripping the nation. Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie, is missing. And there was a big development on February 10th when the FBI publicly released images and video from her doorbell camera.
Right, but they were supposed to be gone,
They were
right?
supposed to be gone. That's what
Yeah.
everybody thought. And on the one hand, this reminds me of so many cases where, on the one hand, I'm so relieved and happy that we have important evidence that can
Sure.
hopefully lead to a resolution in this case. On the other hand, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's always jarring when a cloud provider says, "Oh, by the way, I
Yeah.
have this data that I told you was deleted or implied wasn't being collected. Here it is."
And yeah, it's there in 4K at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So that really raises some questions about management of data in cloud systems, and especially from IoT devices, which I think in general are really not well tracked, but sometimes contain highly sensitive information.
Well, they like incredibly highly sensitive information. Like that's
Yeah.
it's kind of undeniable that they would need some kind of technical controls on the back end that they just don't have.
Yeah. So we're going to dig into that and talk about what we can learn about this from a cybersecurity perspective and how this changes how you manage your data and how it might change how you approach your cloud providers as well.
Right.
Shall we?
Yeah, let's get into it. So I think that the big thing we want to talk about here is unexpected persistence, like data that is just, residing in the cloud for either, whether it be a Ring doorbell or something else. But data that's just, hanging out on a server somewhere that can then be accessed later on down the road, even if you think it might have been deleted.
Yeah, and let's talk about exactly what happened in this case.
Yeah.
So in this case, Nancy Guthrie had a Google Nest doorbell, second generation, and that's important. It's a battery model.
Right.
So apparently when the attacker approached her house, it was removed. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily stop data collection for two reasons. One, there is local storage, a little bit of local storage on that firmware. And reports are saying it might have up to as much as 3 hours potentially of footage. But more than that, it was wireless. It was not wired in terms of the connectivity.
Right.
And so that data can go up to Google. However, Nancy Guthrie did not have a subscription. Apparently, she used this camera so that friends and loved ones, family members could check and make sure that she got home okay.
Sure.
So she only had one camera. In terms of like physical security and camera placement, you usually want more than one camera for exactly this reason. Like if a dude comes up and takes the camera off, you want another camera watching them. We want to make it like a little bit hard. But from a safety perspective, it did its job. It told family members like, hey, she did come home. She did walk in the door. She did leave at this particular time.
Sure. A lot of this reminds me of the Microsoft case we dealt with like years ago, where they were maintaining a bunch of backend data and not telling people about it or something like that.
It's
The magic
funny.
unicorn.
I was talking to a friend of
Yeah.
mine who's a reporter, and I said, "This reminds me of the magic
It
unicorn tool."
sounds like the magic unicorn tool.
Where
yeah.
there was, when you have a business email compromise, so your email gets hacked, one of the things you need to do is rule out any potential access to sensitive information. And at the time, 3, 4, 5 years ago, these cases were costing $500,000, sometimes over $1 million to investigate.
Yeah.
Because they're, first of all, because everybody stores way too much in their email.
Yeah.
And people would have spreadsheets and huge volumes of data, sometimes very sensitive data. So they'd have to have forensic investigators comb through, figure out what sensitive data was in these hacked mailboxes, take an inventory.
Yeah, what people accessed, how
this is
long they
your-
accessed. No, this is my entire thing. And oh
I
God,
know,
got
you lived business
Reddit
email
on Reddit
compromise
this
for
one,
years.
but yes.
So it was really important to be able to find out what emails did the attackers actually read.
Right.
And if you didn't have the proper license, Microsoft said, sorry, we can't get you that information. I'll let you speak to this because you were like elbow deep in these cases day in and day out.
They had the information. You just had to go through a lawyer to get it. It took forever to get. It was
Well, and they told people publicly
Yeah.
it didn't exist.
Yeah, the data they had was that it was debugging data. So it was not necessarily meant for forensic collection. It was not meant for analysis. It was meant for, identifying if the system was working correctly
Well,
on
they
the
were
back end.
saying they didn't
And yeah,
have it. They even told us to our faces when
yep.
we were in Redmond
Yeah, I
that they
remember that.
did not have that data. And then it turned out that they did. And you're right, it was used for debugging purposes.
Right.
And there was a whole secret tool. We'll include a link in the show notes to a whole write up on this. But the question is, what data do cloud providers actually have?
Sure. So, and let's talk about why this applies to like enterprise security as well. I mean, there is I guess an understanding when you have a cloud provider that if they are going to delete or not keep your data, that they will follow through on that.
Well, I think that's exactly the issue. Like
Yeah.
in this case, Google does offer a subscription plan, which Nancy Guthrie did not subscribe to. So
Uh,
she could have been storing her video footage for 30 or 60 days, 24/7, but she wasn't paying for that. And so a lot of people assume, well, that means the data isn't there. And you might even see in the interface either it's not available or
right.
it's been overwritten. But the reality is,
It's still sitting on the server, right? Like,
right. And the terms most likely do not give Google an obligation to delete it.
well, no, they don't. They don't
Right.
really have a reason to.
So they're not required to retain it,
Yeah.
but they are also not obligated to delete it. And that I think is the gray area with cloud providers. Just because they're not obligated to retain it doesn't mean that they are deleting it, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
I think that's the key point. Just because a cloud provider isn't
Yeah.
obligated to retain your data does not mean that they are actually deleting it.
Well, and we can look back at this. I mean, Ring themselves were hit with a pretty heavy lawsuit back in 2024.
Are you talking about the FTC?
Yeah, the FTC filing.
FTC filed a complaint, and then they were actually fined. They issued refunds totaling, I think, about $5.6 million
Yeah,
to
right about. Yeah.
consumers, over 117,000 consumers.
Well, I mean, it just kind of goes to show you, like the data governance that we see in systems like this is kind of up in the air. Like we don't really know what that data is being used for, how long it's being kept.
I mean, with the Ring complaint specifically, I don't know if you had a chance to read the FTC complaint. This
Yep.
was a couple of years ago. But there were instances where employees within Ring, they had access to view customer video footage. And they found that employees, there was one employee who was particularly mentioned, who had been looking at the video surveillance of female customers, specifically any cameras in their bedrooms or other intimate areas.
Hmm.
And then finally it was discovered and reported. But they just didn't have the internal controls to limit access to that video.
We saw this with Tesla like a few years ago as well. Internal cameras in the cars that were recording people driving or something along those lines. We saw Tesla employees joking about things they saw in people's
That's right.
cars.
So the question is, how do you know that they're even collecting this data to begin with? And
Right.
if they are collecting it, how are they managing access to it? And how do you know? Is anybody even auditing this? Are they required to attest to this? This is an area of maturation.
Yep,
I
fair.
think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Where do we go with this? Like, what's our big thing for enterprise security here?
Well, I think, first of all, some cloud providers give you the tools to secure your own data.
Sure.
And actually, I think Apple's a great example of this. Apple has, over the years, rolled out their advanced data protection, which is their version of end-to-end encryption. So that means you control the keys to your data. Only your authorized devices can access your data.
Right.
And if someone were to break into Apple's servers, they couldn't get access to your keys. Now, the flip side of that is that law enforcement can't access it either, as we saw in the San Bernardino case, where
Right.
the U.S., I think it was the FBI, tried to pressure Apple to give them access to a customer's data. And that caused a lot of ripple effects throughout the
Well,
world.
it did, and it's the entire conversation about if this data is stored in something like a cloud provider system. I mean, who can get access to it, and what is the actual encryption level? With the Apple case specifically, the idea was that the individual customer had full autonomy over that data. The U.S. government and also the European government, like they tried to, I guess, overrun that. which is something that we've seen a
Well,
few different
Apple
times. But yeah,
dropped their encryption, end-to-end encryption capabilities in the UK because of that. I think
right.
that was an important
Yeah,
development.
I think that's a really important thing.
But I think a lot of these cases, in a lot of these cases, you see that privacy and security kind of cut both ways. For example, at the Super Bowl, there was a video for a new Ring system or a new Ring feature that allows you to basically put out a neighborhood alert looking for a lost puppy or a lost dog,
Yeah,
and people can send their footage in.
yeah,
At the same time, those capabilities can be abused. Who can access those systems? Is it truly voluntary? Even if it is, there are some potential privacy implications. And also, another part of that Ring settlement a few years ago was about hackers.
yeah,
Hackers were credential stuffing, hackers were getting into all of these systems. So, anything that's helpful for law enforcement could also be valuable and useful for an
yeah.
attacker as well.
Fair enough.
And so,
Yeah,
we have to balance both of those concerns.
yeah, agreed. Observe your entire neighborhood to find a lost dog or something like that is terrifying. But
Well, the search party feature, that's what it was called.
yeah.
I mean, I think, they will find lost dogs, and I hope they find
Oh,
Nancy
I hope they
Guthrie.
do too. But it also means that like every Ring camera is now observing your entire neighborhood all the time,
Right.
and that's yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah,
I thought it was interesting how Kash Patel put it with the Nancy Guthrie case. I do think it's important for us to share this quote.
uh-huh.
So when the FBI came out with this recovered footage, they said it was recovered from, quote, residual data located in back-end systems. So I think, Matt, as a forensic analyst, is the term is that a technical term, residual data?
No, the residual data is not a technical term.
Yeah.
What that means is they had the data and they didn't delete it. Like it's pretty straightforward.
I mean, it is possible they did forensic recovery as well. Uh,
It doesn't sound like they did though. It sounds like the data was literally just sitting on a server and they were able to pull it back up. So
Maybe. I mean, I don't want to make assumptions.
I don't. I
You're
know. I
right.
don't
It
want to
could
either.
have been
But
just
yeah.
data that hadn't been deleted. It could also have been deleted, but that doesn't mean that it's actually been overwritten.
Well, and we all know deleted data is not actually gone. We can still find it, but
Yes.
that's a forensic rabbit hole we don't want to get
This
into.
made me think about the case of my sister and the supercomputer.
Oh God, I
So my
remember that.
sister
Yeah.
was doing her PhD. She is brilliant at a major university, and her whole PhD thesis, it was this code that she had written, and somehow it got deleted off the supercomputer. And there were no backups. This was like years worth of work. She was about to defend her PhD.
Uh
She
huh.
literally just didn't have the stuff. And she called crying. And we talked to the IT folks at this major university. And I still remember thinking, like, chances are very, very slim of getting this back. But you talked them into.
Well, I mean, it was still resident in the RAM. We could still pull it back. So
Right. Well,
yeah.
you talked them into making an image of the RAM of the
Uh
supercomputer.
huh.
And then we went through it just like any other forensic case. And, RAM, this supercomputer was undoubtedly used by dozens, if not hundreds of people. So I
Sure.
was like, it's probably overwritten. And as we were going through it, all of a sudden, boom,
Yep.
everything was there.
We
It was
found the
full
data. Yep.
RAM. And who knows, maybe something like that is residual data. There might be a reason why it took a while to recover this. We don't know. But the bottom line
Yeah.
is you never know exactly what data cloud providers have. At least these days, there's not a whole lot of transparency. So make sure that you understand what they're collecting and what they are deleting. In the United States, we don't have a lot of control over that. So you should assume it's still there unless they attest to the fact that it's deleted.
Fair enough. The number one thing that we can probably say here is to treat vendors as part of your data perimeter. They have data about you. They have things that are sensitive, and if they are not, accurately maintaining that data, then we run into problems. Right?
Yeah. And make sure you understand with your cloud providers who can access your data,
Yeah.
how are they controlling it, things like that. Speaking of which, number 2, control your encryption keys and your access paths. So, for example, you may have the capability with certain providers of holding your own encryption keys. And if you have the staff to support that, sometimes that's a good idea because that means if the cloud provider gets hacked, they can't necessarily get access to your data. And understand who legitimately can get access to your data as well. Is it only your staff? Is it the cloud provider's staff as well? So,
Right.
understand who has that capability.
We saw in our experiment years ago when we did the camera hacking project that we were able to gain access to video and audio feeds from a camera while we were hacking it to turn it into a crypto miner. So, I mean, that data is, potentially vulnerable.
Yeah.
Just want to point that out.
Do you want to do takeaway three?
I'll
Speaking
do
of which,
I'll do takeaway 3. Your IoT devices, your security cameras, everything like that, they need to be part of your data inventory.
yes.
Because they do contain sensitive data. So let's just make sure that we're controlling that data effectively.
I think sometimes IoT systems like camera systems, badge systems, smart building technology are just like overlooked when it comes to a data inventory and sometimes
Yeah,
even vendor vetting, which is surprising when you consider how fundamental it is. But make sure you're including those when you're thinking about vendor vetting, vendor management, stuff like that.
completely. Yes.
Align your retention decisions with your legal and regulatory risk. So, the longer retention times might align with your investigatory needs, but at the same time, it could also increase the blast radius for any breaches.
It
It could
could.
increase your e discovery scope, maybe your privacy obligations. So, data is hazardous material, and the longer you hold it, the more you have to invest in securing it properly and the more risk you have. So, make sure you're balancing
Yeah.
those needs.
Fair enough. Let's end with test whether your deletion actually works.
Yes,
That is
good
a
one.
that is a big thing. Yeah, I mean, if you're deleting data, I mean, understand whether or not it's actually gone.
Yeah. Or
Uh,
whether it could be residual data
uh yeah,
that's on back end systems. Because if so, you might still need to manage it. Or do you still have it in backups? And if so, remember, it's still there. You can't just be like, la, 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 it's gone.
yeah. No, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. With that, thank you so much for tuning in to Cyberside Chats. Please like and subscribe. And we look forward to a resolution in this case.